What we're going to do today is show you how to install a Mitchell Overdrive into a Model A differential. And you'll notice that the differential is out of the car. That's absolutely necessary if you're going to install one of these. You'll also notice that on this one, there's no mainspring on the differential, and that's because this is a spare that I have. And we're going to just work on this spare. We're not actually going to install the Mitchell into this differential, but we're going to show you all the steps that you need to take to be able to put a Mitchell Overdrive in. So the first thing I'll do is you have to remove the distributor drive up here, because when you go to remove the torque tube, that will stop the torque tube from sliding off. So I know every Model A ever built has nice loose pre-loosened bolts like that. Okay, they don't. And these parts are going to reinstall. You will not reinstall the the speedometer drive with a Mitchell Overdrive. They take their speedometer drive off of the actual Mitchell Overdrive box. So this gets set aside, and you can see that it engages a gear down here. So if you don't have that drive out, when you try to slide the torque tube out, it'll just stay engaged with the teeth on that gear, and you won't be able to slide it out. All right, the next thing we're going to do is remove the bolt for the two rear radius rods, because they go through a hole in the torque tube also, so you've got to have that cleared out.
Ready?
The next thing you have to remove, this drive assembly has a snap ring down in here on the drive shaft. And maybe you can see down in there, but this snap ring has to come off. You just get a screwdriver that'll fit down through the tines of the drive shaft, and it'll pop, it'll loosen. And sometimes these come right off, and sometimes they like staying attached. But either way, it's got to come off. There we go. And you can actually push it through the hole for the drive speedometer drive quite often. So there it is. That snap ring has to come off, or the torque tube will not slide through the front bearing carrier and the speedometer drive. Okay, normally these 6 bolts, they do have to be removed, but normally each one of these has a safety wire hole through it, and normally you'll see from the factory, I believe they came with 1 strand of safety wire all the way through tied off. This differential didn't have the safety wire on, but you do want to make sure that you put the safety wire on when you reinstall, and we'll show that. But you would also have to take the safety wire off. All right, now that we have these 6 bolts off the torque tube to differential housing, we're going to, carefully so it doesn't roll off the jack stands, we're going to roll this forward And the reason we're doing that is we are inside a garage and there's not enough room to slide the torque tube off without hitting the ceiling. So you just grab the torque tube, and if you've removed everything, this torque tube will slide right off the front of the differential and set it aside. You will not be reusing this. Mitchell supplies a new torque tube. Okay. What you'll see here, and I have extras as an example, is you have two nuts. The bottom controls the preload tension. The bottom nut controls the preload tension because this is a taper bearing on top and there's a taper bearing underneath and a double race with the taper matching on installed in the differential housing. So in order to begin the process of removing this, you have to take off the first nut. And it's important, critically important, that you maintain the bearing preload that the differential has. So what I'll describe to you, this is a star washer that when it's assembled is bent over a flat spot in the nut to keep both of these nuts from moving. The top one is only a lock nut. The bottom one maintains the preload on the bearings. So what I'll be doing is I'll be undoing this bent tab to allow the top nut to turn. If there's one bent over the bottom nut, you don't need to worry about it at all, because once you have the top nut off, this star washer will lift right off. So only unbend the ones that are locking the top nut from moving. And this one's really tight against there, so I'm going to need to get a different chisel. Okay. Now we're going to get into using some of the specialized tools. These are wrenches that are cut to fit just these nuts. You put one on the bottom nut, one on the lock nut, and you want to just remove the top one. It's got to come all the way off. Along with that locking washer. And those will slide all the way up and off the drive shaft. Okay.
Mark?
Okay, now, again, like I mentioned, this nut, you want to be able to put it back in exactly the same position to maintain the preload. What you do is you take a center punch and you dimple right in the middle of the keyway, the outside keyway, so that when you reinstall that nut, you can put it back in exactly the same position. You just make one dimple, and that will allow you to bring that nut back. Now you can undo that nut. When we bring it back in, we'll bring it right to there, and that's where it stays. Okay. Again, this is the top nut. This is the one that you just made a punch mark in to be able to index it. Do not confuse these two nuts, because if you put this one on the bottom, you won't find your punch mark, and you won't have the same preload on the bearing. So I keep these separated. What I do is I leave the top nut laying on top the lock washer. That way I don't get confused. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, now we're going to be using the second set of specialized tools. These are made by Mitchell Manufacturing, and they work very, very well. The first part, this is going to pull this entire bearing pack, which is, again, consists of 2 taper roller bearings and the double race that's press fit into this differential housing. The first part of the tool will come down here to protect this mating surface. You can see it's got bolt marks, which will become evident what we're going to do with it. So that goes up here first. And it's held on, this all comes in the kit, with 2 short nuts. You don't have to torque these down, but you do have to make sure when you put this tool on that you center it so you have enough room for that race to come out. So you don't want it to be over like this. If you do, you'll be pulling the race against the tool and you'll never get the race out of the differential. So you center that. And then I just snug these down. Okay. Okay, the second part of the tool, you have these bolts backed out. This is what's going to pull the pack out. So it goes over the top of the drive shaft along with one of your nuts. I always use the top one or a spare. This will come down, and then you want to make sure that none of these 3 bolts are resting on the bolts that are holding this bottom plate on. So you just want to make sure you're clear of that. And then you start this nut on here. And that can just be finger tight. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to equally tighten these nuts down, and you'll see it'll start to pull this entire pack out of the differential. But you have to do it equally. I do half of a turn on each nut, and I just work my way around. So there's one. If you have 2 helpers, you can give each one of them a ratchet, and you can just work in unison, and that makes the job go a little bit faster. And now we're going to try to show you how that entire race with the 2 bearings is being pulled out of the differential housing.
Action.
Okay, and now I'm giving more than that half turn because I can feel that it's sliding out evenly, or at least fairly evenly, and we're near having the race come all the way out of the housing.
Ready.
Okay, and that is the pack out. You then remove this nut. You can set this guy down on the ground if you want. Take the nut off, pull the tool off, and there you have the race with the bearings that we're going to try to maintain the preload on. Okay? Pause.
Got it.
Don't forget to remove this plate. You're now done with this part of that removal tool. Okay, we're going to, what I do is I put the bottom nut back on. just to keep the bearings in contact with with the race and each other. I've already taken out the Carter key on this, and I'll explain how to put that back in. But we're going to need to remove this nut, and we're going to take this pinion and bearings off the drive shaft with another Mitchell tool.
Yep.
All right, this is the nut that holds the pinion gear onto the drive shaft. It's a 15/16 nut. It's Carter pinned. I've already removed the Carter pin, but I'll show you there's a correct way to install it when we reinstall this. So for this, you're going to need a helper. I clamped the drive shaft into a vise, and then you're going to need a pipe wrench to keep that from turning, because these are from the factory usually on there pretty tight. So there it goes. Okay, now I've got the nut off. We're going to use the next specialized tool. I put a block of wood down to protect these threads, even though when you do a Mitchell, you're not going to be using this drive shaft, you're going to be using their new drive shaft. So the specialized tool for removing that, you can't press it off, and it's a taper with a keyway, just like the rear axle. These are on here, and they need shock to come off. Mitchell has made a tool to remove these that really work nicely. There's an aluminum plate that protects the pinion. That goes on first. It's a soft metal, so it won't hurt that. The next thing is a heavy steel slide. You start up here. Usually you can do it in one hit, and you just throw it down on that aluminum plate, and it'll typically break loose after 1 or sometimes 3 or 4 hits. And if it's broken loose, it slides right off the drive shaft, and this is what you're going to need to put back onto your Mitchell drive shaft. Pause.
Okay.
All right, your Mitchell will come with a new drive shaft and a new keyway. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to be reinstalling this back on a stock drive shaft because I don't have a Mitchell drive shaft to show you. The only difference is they're shorter and splined up here, and that's all explained in the instructions. We're showing you how to use the tools to get this apart. Here's a cute little thing that you rarely see. Look on here and you'll see a Ford script key. It's the second one I've ever seen. Okay, what you're going to do, there's 2 keyways, the outside one for that locking washer and the inside one for this key. You line up the keyway, it slides on that taper. There you see the hole for the Carter pin. Castellated nut goes on. We're going to tighten that up, and I try to get 80 foot-pounds of torque on this, but once I get to 80, if I need to back off a little bit or go forward a little to get the key castellations to line with the keyway, I don't have a problem with that because it's not going to be going anywhere. So we tighten this up and then torque it. Okay, we're back in the vise. You'll need a pipe wrench on. And I put, like I said, 80, 85 foot-pounds of torque on this. Take it off and see if you're lined up with the Carter pin hole. And we're almost there. I need to back it off just a little bit to get the hole to line up, and I think that's just fine. There, we're lined up perfectly. Okay. Okay, when you put the Carter pin in, you go ahead and index the head down into the cancellation, but you do not bend the carter pin over the top of this nut because it's a very close fit between the end of the drive shaft and the ring gear and the differential. So on these, you have to go to the side. To keep it from hitting against the ring gear once you get it assembled. Okay, cut.
No.
So this is the way you want the carter pin to go in, just so that it's not bent over the top of the drive shaft to catch anything. You also could run it straight down and just run one tab down and cut the other tab off. Whatever works for you, just make sure you don't have any tabs over the top of the drive shaft here. All right, we've got our bottom nut on, the punch marks lined up in the center of the keyway, and what we're going to do is just introduce this back to the differential housing, and then you get your partner to hold it, and then this is the next and last tool. This will press that entire race and bearing pack back into the differential housing. It's got a bevel on it, and the bevel goes up, so it will contact this and push it evenly down into the housing. And then these bolts with an Allen head and the nut have the nut backed all the way off toward the Allen head, and we'll just get all those threaded in. Cut. Okay, we're getting these run in. You want to get them run down into this housing, not too far, but at least 1 bolt diameter in. So 4 or 5 turns down. And that should do it. Then for this, you need a 9/16 deep socket and the ratchet. And what we're going to do is we're going to tighten all these nuts down onto the plate, and we're going to evenly push this race back into the housing.
Yep.
Now this also will go much quicker if you have other people helping. I like to have 2 helpers, and we each take 2 nuts. But since I don't have that, I'm just going to start it, and I'm going to do the same way I did on the removal, is just down half a turn on each one. And you want to get that race started square going into the housing, and you can see that by eye. Okay, we're started, but as you can tell, we're not all the way down. But one thing you want to make sure is that you keep rotating this shaft so that the angled teeth of the pinion will mesh with the angled teeth of the ring gear, and you don't lock up on that. So just occasionally reach up here and give it a turn, and make sure that you're not hitting, the teeth are meshing inside the differential.
Go.
Okay, as you can see, I've been working only 3 nuts because this one's sliding in pretty nicely. You do it until they bottom out, and that'll ensure that the race is all the way seated down in, and you still are able to turn your drive shaft. Cut. Okay, so use the Allen head to remove those 6 bolts. The tool comes right off. At least it should come right off. Cut. All right, and then you just lift the pressing plate out. And that is it for the specialized tools. The next thing we'll do, put the lock washer on. We've got the punch mark right in the center of the keyway. This goes, and the tab that it was locked to goes right down onto that nut. The top nut will go on, and then that just gets tightened and we'll bend one of these tabs back up to make sure it doesn't come untightened. Okay, we still haven't bent our tab up. We'll be doing that. I wanted to say one last thing. Before you slide that new Mitchell Overdrive and torque tube on, do not forget to put the gasket that Mitchell gives you on here. You'll be very unhappy if you forget it. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video.